They left a trained war veteran to freeze in a blizzard, but his dog led him to something hidden in the rock that no one was supposed to find. Caleb Turner had survived places where maps stopped working, but nothing prepared him for the night he was locked out in the cold with nowhere left to go. No shelter, no backup, just a storm closing in, and a dog that refused to walk away. What happened next wasn't luck. It was something buried, waiting. Before we go on, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. The snow had already started sticking by the time Caleb Turner realized she wasn't going to open the door again. It wasn't a storm yet. Not the kind that made headlines. Just a slow, steady fall, flakes drifting down under the yellow glow of the porch light. Quiet enough that the world felt muffled, like someone had thrown a blanket over everything that used to make sense. His duffel bag lay half open in the yard, one strap twisted, the contents spilled across the frozen grass. A pair of boots, a rolled blanket, a stack of worn clothes that still carried the smell of detergent from a life that didn't belong to him anymore. The door had shut without a slam. That was the part that stayed with him. No shouting, no broken glass, no final words thrown like knives across the room. Just the click of the lock. Caleb stood there for a long moment, staring at the wood grain of the door, as if it might shift back into something else if he waited long enough. His breath came out in thin white lines, steady, controlled. The way it had to be when everything around you started falling apart. On behind him, Ranger didn't move. The German Shepherd stood close enough that Caleb could feel the warmth from his body through the cold air. The dog's ears were forward, alert, but he wasn't barking. He wasn't pacing. He just watched the house, eyes fixed, as if waiting for a signal that hadn't come yet. Caleb tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack. He didn't knock again. In another life, maybe he would have. Maybe he would have said something, anything, to break the silence pressing in on him from all sides. But his body didn't move that way anymore. It had learned a different set of rules. You don't waste motion. You don't repeat failed actions. You don't stand in the open longer than you have to. The porch light flickered once. Inside, a shadow passed across the window. Caleb's jaw tightened just for a second, and then it settled. He shifted his weight, scanning without thinking. The driveway, the tree line beyond the fence, the angle of the wind, the sound, what little there was of it. Nothing out of place, no threat, just absence. He exhaled slowly. Ranger stepped forward then, nudging his hand once with his nose. Not urgent, not nervous. Just there. Caleb looked down at him. "Yeah," he muttered, voice rough from disuse. "I got it." The dog's tail moved once, low and controlled. Caleb crouched and zipped the duffel in one smooth motion. His fingers were already stiff from the cold, but they worked clean, practiced. He slung the bag over his shoulder, adjusted the weight without looking. He didn't take anything else from the yard. If it didn't fit, it didn't go. That rule had kept him alive once. It felt like it still mattered. So the snow picked up just a little as he stepped off the porch. Behind him, the house stayed quiet. Warm light glowing through the windows. A place someone else would sleep tonight. He didn't turn around. Halfway down the driveway, a sudden gust of wind cut through the trees, sharp and fast. It carried a sound with it, just a loose branch knocking somewhere in the dark. Caleb stopped. His body reacted before his mind caught up. Shoulders tightened, head angled, eyes scanning left, right. His hand moved halfway to his belt before stopping, fingers curling into empty air. Contact. The word flashed through his head like it always did. Then nothing followed. No movement. No second sound. No pattern. Just wind. He forced his hand down slowly. "Not here," he said under his breath. Ranger had already shifted position, from stepping slightly ahead, body angled toward the tree line. Not aggressive, just ready. Caleb watched him for a second longer. The dog didn't bark, didn't move, just stood there, steady as a post, waiting. Caleb nodded once, almost to himself. All right. They moved together after that. Down the driveway, past the rusted mailbox, leaning at an angle, out onto the narrow road that cut through the trees like a scar. The snow was coming down harder now, filling in their tracks almost as soon as they made them. By the time they reached the edge of the property, the house behind them was already fading into the white. Caleb didn't stop walking. The truck was parked a mile down the road, where he'd left it earlier that afternoon. He'd known something was coming then. Not this exactly, but something. You learn to read tension, the way other people read weather. He kept his pace steady, conserving energy. Ranger moved beside him, occasionally drifting a step ahead, then back again, always checking, always aware. The wind shifted again, colder this time. Caleb pulled his collar up, tucking his chin down. His mind drifted, uninvited. A different night, different cold, sand instead of snow, the smell of diesel and dust, a radio crackling with voices that never quite matched the reality in front of you. Flash. Light tearing across the sky. Sound hitting a second later. He blinked hard. The trees snapped back into focus around him. Snow. Silence. Idaho. Not Afghanistan. He kept walking. They reached the truck just as the road started to disappear under a thicker layer of snow. Caleb unlocked it, tossed the bag into the back seat, then paused with one hand on the door. For a second, he just stood there. Ranger jumped in without waiting, turning once before settling on the floorboard, eyes still on Caleb. The engine turned over slow, then caught. Warm air wouldn't come for a while. Caleb gripped the steering wheel, staring out through the windshield as the wipers dragged across the glass, smearing snow into streaks of gray. He didn't know where he was going. Not exactly. There was a piece of land, Montana. Something his father had left behind. A place he hadn't seen in over a decade. Rock, timber, nothing much else. It wasn't a plan, but it was a direction. He shifted into drive. The truck rolled forward, tires slipping once before catching. As they pulled away, Ranger lifted his head, his ears flicking toward the road ahead. Caleb didn't look back. He had survived war. But this silence, this empty, waiting quiet, it followed him down the road like something unfinished. And for the first time, he wasn't sure how to fight it. The highway thinned as the miles passed. Streetlights gave way to long stretches of dark. Houses disappeared, replaced by empty fields and broken fence lines half buried in snow. By the time Caleb crossed into Montana, the world had narrowed to two pale tracks ahead of him and the low hum of the engine beneath his hands. Ranger hadn't moved much. The dog stayed low in the passenger footwell, head lifted just enough to track the road. Every now and then, his ears twitched, picking up sounds Caleb couldn't hear over the tires and wind. Caleb drove without music, without radio, just the sound of breathing and the steady rhythm of movement. He didn't rush. Speed got people killed in bad terrain. That lesson stuck. Always had. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, scanning ahead the way he used to scan roads in another country, watching for anything that didn't belong. A shape out of place, a shadow where it shouldn't be. But out here, everything looked like it didn't belong. That was the problem. He reached the turnoff just before dawn. If he hadn't known it was there, he would have missed it. A narrow break in the trees. No sign. No marker. Just a worn track leading off into the white. Caleb slowed, then turned in without hesitation. The truck jolted as the tires left pavement and hit frozen ruts. Snow kicked up along the sides, brushing against the undercarriage like hands trying to pull him back. He kept going. The path curved upward, climbing into higher ground. Pines closed in tighter on both sides, their branches heavy with snow. The light was just starting to bleed into the sky, a pale gray that made everything look flat and endless. After half a mile, the truck started to struggle. The incline steepened. The ruts deepened. Caleb eased off the gas, letting the tires find their grip instead of forcing it. The engine growled low, steady. Easy, he muttered, more to himself than the truck. Ranger shifted, bracing slightly. The tires slipped once, then caught. Another 100 yards. Then the truck stopped climbing. The wheels spun, chewing into packed snow and ice without gaining ground. Caleb let it run for another second, then cut the engine. Silence dropped in hard. He sat there, hands still on the wheel, and watching the faint steam curl up from the hood. Ranger lifted his head higher, ears forward. Caleb exhaled slowly. All right. He stepped out into the cold. It hit harder up here, sharper, cleaner. The kind of cold that didn't just sit on your skin. It pushed through it, straight to the bone. He closed the door without slamming it. The land opened up just beyond the trees. Not wide, not flat, just exposed. A slope of broken ground, scattered with limestone outcroppings and patches of scrub cedar twisted into shapes that looked like they'd given up growing halfway through. No cabin, no structure, just land. His land. Caleb walked a few steps forward, boots crunching over the frozen surface. Ranger moved ahead of him now, nose low, tracing lines across the ground, as if the place held a story only he could read. Oh, and Caleb didn't follow right away. He stood still, let his eyes adjust. Habit. Always take a moment before you move into a new AO. He scanned left, right, up the ridge, down toward what looked like a dry creek bed cutting through the lower ground. No movement, no smoke, no tracks except animal. Small, scattered, nothing recent. He nodded once. Clear. Then he moved. Ranger circled back briefly, brushing against his leg before heading out again, wider this time. Caleb dropped his pack near a flat section of rock and crouched. First step, understand the ground. He scooped up a handful of dirt beneath the thin layer of snow, frozen solid. He tapped it against the rock. It didn't break. He glanced around at the trees. Too thin, too crooked. Nothing straight enough to cut into usable beams without wasting half of it. He stood and paced out a rough square, counting steps under his breath. 16 by 12. Standard. Enough for a basic one-room structure. He stopped, looking at the space, then at the trees again, then back at the space. His jaw tightened. Not enough material, not enough time. He turned slightly, adjusting his angle to feel the wind. It came down the slope in a steady line, cutting across the ground like a blade. No natural break, no ridge, nothing to block it. If he built here, the wind would push straight through every seam. He shifted position, scanning for alternatives. Higher ground? Too exposed. Lower ground? Drainage risk. Snowmelt would turn it into mud. He moved toward the edge of the slope, boots sliding slightly on loose rock. The creek bed below caught his eye. It dipped sharply, and then disappeared beneath a stretch of broken stone. Underground flow, maybe. Unreliable. He filed it away anyway. Water mattered, even if it wasn't easy. Ranger barked once. Short, sharp. Caleb turned immediately. The dog stood near a cluster of rocks, body angled, head low. Not aggressive, just focused. Caleb approached slowly. What is it? Ranger didn't move, just watched the ground. Caleb crouched beside him, brushing away snow with his gloved hand. Nothing. Just rock. Cold. Solid. Unremarkable. He sat back on his heels, scanning the area again. Nothing out of place. He looked at Ranger. The dog blinked once, then shifted his attention elsewhere, already moving on. Caleb stayed there a second longer, then stood. All right. He returned to the pack and pulled out a small notebook, flipped it open. Numbers. He started writing. Cord per day. Quarter, maybe less in this terrain. 10 days before deep cold hits. Maybe 12 if he pushed. He paused. Ran the numbers again. Didn't change. He drew a line across the page. 17 cords, minimum. He looked up at the trees again, then at his hands, then back at the page. The math didn't bend, didn't adjust, didn't care. It just sat there. Final. Ranger came back, settling near the pack, watching him. Caleb closed the notebook slowly. He didn't throw it, didn't curse, just slid it back into the bag. Then he stood, turning in a slow circle, taking the land in one more time. Wind, rock, bad timber, no cover, no time. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder. His body didn't feel panic, didn't spike, didn't freeze. It just recalculated. That was the difference. Out here, panic got replaced by something colder, something quieter. A decision tree that kept running even when the answers stopped making sense. Caleb looked down at Ranger. The dog held his gaze for a moment, steady, then glanced toward the ridge again. Caleb followed the look. Nothing there. Just more rock, more empty ground. He nodded anyway. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out." The wind picked up, carrying a sharper edge now. Not a storm yet, but close. Caleb pulled his jacket tighter and started moving again, boots crunching across ground that didn't want him there. Behind him, the truck sat half-buried already. Ahead of him, the land stretched out, silent, indifferent, and waiting. The math had already decided how this would end. Caleb just hadn't accepted it yet. But by the time the light drained out of the sky, the cold had settled in for good. It didn't rush in. It crept. First into the fingers, then the joints, then deeper, where it didn't sting. It just stayed. Caleb worked until he couldn't feel the edge of the axe anymore. One tree. That was all he got down before dusk. It had taken most of the afternoon. The trunk twisted halfway up, fibers tearing instead of splitting clean. When it finally fell, it didn't drop the way he'd planned. It leaned, dragged, caught against another branch before hitting the ground at an angle that made it nearly useless. He stood there for a second, breathing through his nose. Then he moved on. No wasted time on frustration. That rule still held. By dark, he had dragged what he could back toward the rock shelf where he'd dropped his pack. Oh, not enough for a wall, not enough for a roof, just pieces. Pieces didn't keep heat. He built a lean-to anyway, low profile, back against the rock, windbreak on one side. Not a home, just a position. Ranger stayed close, circling wide once before settling near the opening. His body angled outward, head low, eyes moving, always scanning. Caleb didn't tell him to. He didn't have to. The fire took longer than it should have. The wood was damp beneath the surface. The flame caught, then died, then caught again. Caleb adjusted, breaking smaller pieces, feeding it slow until the heat finally held. Smoke curled up, thin and uncertain, slipping past the edge of the lean-to and disappearing into the dark. Caleb sat with his back against the rock, hands extended toward the fire. He didn't relax, not fully. His shoulders stayed tight, but his head angled slightly, listening. Ranger shifted once, then stilled. The night settled in around them. No insects, no distant traffic, just wind. It moved through the trees in long, low passes, bending branches, carrying loose snow in soft waves across the ground. Every now and then something cracked, a limb snapping under weight somewhere deeper in the woods. Each sound landed the same way, sharp, immediate. Caleb's eyes opened wider each time. Not fear, recognition. He watched the tree line through the firelight, the shadows stretching and folding as the flames moved. A flicker, a shift. For a split second, it wasn't trees anymore. It was a wall, mud, dust, a broken structure under a sky that burned orange instead of black. A voice in his ear. "Contact left." Caleb's hand moved before the memory finished forming. But it shot to his side, fingers curling tight around nothing. Empty. The fire cracked. The trees snapped back into place. Snow. Dark. Silence. He blinked once, hard. His breathing had changed without him noticing. Shorter, faster. Ranger was already standing, not barking, just there, between Caleb and the open side of the lean-to, body firm, head slightly lowered. Caleb watched him for a second, then forced his hand down slowly. "Stand down," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. Ranger didn't move right away. His ears twitched, catching something Caleb couldn't hear. Or maybe something Caleb didn't want to hear. A second later, the dog relaxed just enough to sit, but his eyes stayed fixed on the dark. Caleb leaned forward, adding another piece of wood to the fire. The flame caught, but pushing the shadows back a few inches. He stayed like that for a while, watching, listening. The cold pressed in harder as the hours passed. The fire helped, but it wasn't enough. Heat slipped through gaps, bled into the open air, vanished as fast as he built it. He adjusted his position, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. It didn't matter. The ground beneath him held the cold like it belonged there. Ranger shifted closer, pressing his side against Caleb's leg. Not seeking comfort, providing it. Caleb didn't acknowledge it out loud. He just let it happen. Sometime in the night, he drifted. Not sleep. Not really. Just a shallow drop where the edges blurred. That's when it hit. Light. White. Blinding. Too close. Sound followed a fraction too late. A hollow crack that punched through everything else. Caleb's eyes snapped open. He was already moving. Up, forward, hand reaching, body low, the fire scattered under his boot, embers kicking out across the ground. Ranger lunged with him, a low growl cutting through the air. Caleb's chest tightened, breath locked halfway in. The world tilted, then stopped. No second explosion, no voices, no return fire. Just wind, just snow, just the broken outline of his own shelter, barely holding shape under the weight of the night. He stood there, frozen in place at the moment stretching too long. Then slowly, piece by piece, it came back together. Montana. Not Afghanistan. No convoy. No blast. Just a tree limb giving way under ice. His breathing didn't slow right away. It stayed high, sharp, stuck in his throat like something that wouldn't clear. Ranger stepped in front of him again, closer this time. Not blocking. Grounding. Caleb lowered his head slightly, eyes tracking the ground until the shapes made sense again. Fire, snow, boot prints, no blood, no debris. He let the breath out. Long, controlled. Yeah, he said under his breath. His voice sounded different. Not broken, just thinner. He crouched, brushing scattered embers back together, rebuilding the fire from what was left. His hands worked steady again, even if the rest of him hadn't caught up. Ranger stayed close, closer than before. The rest of the night passed without another break. But Caleb didn't sleep. Not after that. He sat with his back to the rock, eyes open, watching the dark the way he used to watch the edges of a perimeter, while waiting for something that didn't come. By the time the first gray light touched the ridge, the fire had burned low again. Caleb stood slowly, joints stiff, muscles tight from holding tension too long. He stepped out from the lean-to, scanning the land as the shapes came back into view. Nothing had changed. Same rock, same trees, same impossible ground. But something else had shifted. Not out there. In him. He could feel it. The same thing that used to follow him off helicopters and into places where maps stopped working. That edge. That constant readiness. Out here, it didn't fade. It sharpened. Caleb looked down at Ranger. The dog met his eyes, steady, waiting, then glanced toward the ridge again. Same direction as before. Same quiet insistence. Caleb followed the look. Still nothing. Just rock, wind, silence. He nodded anyway. All right, he said. The word hung in the cold air for a second before disappearing. Then he reached for the axe and started again. The rhythm came back first. Not strength, not speed, just rhythm. Caleb raised the axe, brought it down, reset his stance, and did it again. Each strike landed a little cleaner than the last. Not because the wood got easier, but because his body adjusted. Find the angle. Follow the grain. Don't fight the material. Same rule. different field. Ranger stayed close at first, watching, then drifted outward in a slow arc. He moved through the rocks and scrub like he was mapping the place in layers, near, mid, far, checking scent lines Caleb couldn't see. Caleb didn't call him back. Out here, early warning mattered more than proximity. The sun climbed, pale and weak, and barely warming the surface of anything it touched. Frost clung to the edges of stone. Breath hung longer in the air before disappearing. By mid-morning, Caleb had managed to split part of the fallen cedar into rough sections. Not good lumber, not straight, but usable if he adjusted. He paused long enough to roll his shoulders and flex his fingers. The skin along his palms had already started to crack where the handle rubbed. Blood had surfaced in thin lines, then dried into darker streaks against the cold. He wiped his hands on his jeans. Didn't slow down. Ranger barked once. Not sharp, not alarmed. Just enough to break the rhythm. Caleb stopped mid-swing, listened. The wind had shifted, or maybe something moved against it. He lowered the axe slowly, turning his head just enough to catch the direction without exposing his full profile. Movement, down the slope. Not fast, not hidden, deliberate. Caleb stepped back from the work area, putting the rock shelf at his side. Not cover, but better than open ground. Ranger had already repositioned, standing a few yards ahead, body angled between Caleb and the movement. His tail was still, ears forward, no growl, not yet. A shape came into view through the trees. Horse, then rider. Caleb's grip on the axe loosened just a fraction. Not a threat, not immediate, still unknown. The man rode slow, letting the animal pick its way through the uneven ground. He didn't look around much, didn't rush, just followed a line that suggested he'd been here before. He reached the edge of the rock shelf and stopped. For a moment, while neither of them spoke. The horse shifted, breath steaming in the cold. The man swung one leg over and dismounted without effort. Older, but not weak. Movements measured, efficient. He tied the reins loosely to a low branch, then turned toward Caleb. Up close, the lines in his face stood out deeper. Weathered. Set. The kind that didn't come from age alone. He looked at Caleb, then at Ranger, then at the scattered wood, then at the land. He took his time, like he was already running numbers in his head. "Didn't expect anyone to be up here this time of year," he said finally. His voice was low, rough, used to being heard without being raised. Caleb didn't answer right away. He shifted his weight slightly, keeping the distance the same. "Wasn't expecting company either." The man nodded once. Fair. He stepped forward a few paces, boots crunching lightly over the frozen ground. Ranger didn't move, but his head tracked every inch. The man noticed. "Good dog," he said. Ranger didn't react. The man's eyes flicked back to Caleb. "Name's Earl Dawson." Caleb gave a small nod. "Caleb?" No handshake. No need. Earl turned, scanning the land again. He walked the edge of the shelf, kicking lightly at the ground here and there. Testing. Checking. He stopped near the half-built lean-to, reached out, tapped one of the support pieces with his boot. It shifted. Not much. Enough. Earl looked up at the sky, then back at Caleb. "You planning to stay?" Caleb didn't hesitate. "Yes." Earl let that sit for a second. Then he walked a slow circle, taking in the rest. The timber, the slope, the wind. He stopped near the edge, looking down toward the dry creek bed, then back at the trees, then at Caleb. "You got maybe..." He paused, calculating. 10 days before this turns on you." Caleb said nothing. Earl continued. "You cut what? Quarter cord a day out here? Maybe less with that kind of timber." He gestured toward the twisted cedar. "You need 6 just to get through January. 8 if the cold settles in and stays." He pointed with his chin toward the lean-to. "That won't hold heat, not with that wind coming down the ridge." The words weren't harsh. They were precise, measured, like someone listing facts, not opinions. Caleb felt the weight of them anyway, not in his chest, in his hands, in the way his grip on the axe tightened just a little more than it needed to. Earl walked back toward him, stopping a few feet short. He didn't look unkind, and he looked certain. "You spend one night out here when the real cold hits." He let the sentence hang for a second. "They'll carry you out stiff by morning." No emphasis, no threat, just outcome. Ranger shifted his stance slightly, leaning closer to Caleb's side. Caleb didn't move, didn't argue, didn't explain. He just held Earl's gaze for a moment longer than most people would. Then he looked past him, at the land, at the trees that weren't enough, at the rock that didn't offer anything, at the numbers he'd already run. Earl followed his line of sight, waited. When Caleb didn't respond, Earl gave a small nod. Like that answered something. He turned, untied the horse, and swung back into the saddle. Before he left, he glanced back once. Not at Caleb, at the lean-to, at the wood, at the slope, then at Ranger. The dog held his gaze, didn't blink. Earl nodded again, almost to himself. Then he rode off the way he came, the sound of hooves fading into the trees. Caleb stood there long after he was gone. The wind hadn't changed. The land hadn't changed. But the numbers. They pressed harder now, clearer. No margin, no adjustment. Just a line that led in one direction. He looked down at his hands, then at the axe, then back at the place where Earl had stood. "You spend one night out here." The words stayed. Didn't echo, didn't fade. They just settled. Caleb turned back to the wood, lifted the axe, brought it down. Again, and again. The rhythm returned, but something underneath it had shifted. Not doubt, not exactly. Something colder, something closer to acceptance. Not of failure, but of the fact that the way he was doing this wasn't going to work. Ranger moved out again, wider this time, back toward the rocks, back toward the ridge, back toward the place he'd been watching since morning. Caleb noticed, didn't follow. Not yet. He split another piece of wood, then another. But his eyes drifted more often now, toward the stone, toward the ground that hadn't offered him anything, toward the direction Ranger kept choosing. The axe came down one more time, then stopped mid-air. Caleb held it there for a second, then lowered it slowly, and turned. Not toward the trees, not toward the lean-to, but toward the rock. Toward the place that still didn't make sense. Ranger was already there, waiting. He stood at the base of the rock face. Paws planted, a head tilted slightly to one side like he was listening to something buried deep beneath the stone. Not looking. Listening. Caleb approached slow, boots scraping lightly over frozen ground. The wind pressed against his back, cutting down the ridge in a steady line. But here, near the rock, it felt different. Not warmer. Just less. Ranger scratched at the surface once, then again. Not wild, not frantic. Controlled. Focused on a narrow seam in the limestone, barely wide enough to catch a shadow. Caleb crouched beside him. "What is it?" Ranger didn't look at him. He pressed his nose close to the crack, inhaled, then pawed again, harder this time. Small bits of frozen dirt and grit broke loose, sliding down the face of the stone. Caleb leaned in. At first he saw nothing. Just rock. Rough, pale, unbroken. Then something shifted. Well, not in the stone, in the grass. A few thin strands near the base of the seam moved, not with the wind, but against it. They trembled inward, drawn toward the crack like something on the other side was pulling. Caleb stilled. The wind behind him gusted harder, pushing snow across the ground. But here the movement ran the opposite way. He took off his glove, held his hand near the seam, waited. For a second, nothing. Then, a faint push. Cold, but steady. Not sharp like the wind. Not cutting. Just moving. Caleb's fingers flexed slightly. Air. Coming out of solid rock. He pulled his hand back slowly. Ranger sat back on his haunches, watching him now. Waiting. Caleb glanced over his shoulder, scanning the ridge again. Same terrain, same silence. No change. But this didn't fit. He leaned closer, narrowing his eyes, tracing the line of the seam upward. It widened slightly higher up, then disappeared behind a thicker slab of stone. Not a surface crack. Something deeper. He reached for the edge, pressing his fingers into the gap. It went back farther than it should have. Not much, but enough. Ranger stepped forward again, pawing at the base with more urgency now. Small rocks shifted loose, clattering down against Caleb's boots. Caleb caught one in his hand. Cold. Dry. He looked at it for a second, then at the seam, then back at Ranger. The dog's tail moved once. Low. Certain. Caleb exhaled slowly. All right. He stood, walked back to the lean-to, and grabbed the axe, not for chopping, for leverage. When he returned, Ranger had already started again, digging at the lower edge, on widening the opening just enough to expose darker space behind the outer layer. Caleb set the blade into the seam, twisting carefully. The metal scraped against stone, sending a dull vibration up through his hands. He adjusted, tried a different angle, pressed again. This time something shifted. A small piece broke loose, then another. Not clean, not easy, but moving. He worked at it for the next hour, alternating between prying and pulling, fingers going numb even without the gloves. The wind picked up behind him, carrying sharper gusts that should have cut straight through his jacket. But they didn't hit him the same here. They broke, split around the rock. Caleb noticed, filed it away. Ranger stayed close, occasionally stepping in to clear loose debris, then backing off to let Caleb work. No barking. There's no distraction. Just persistence. By the time the light started to fade, the opening had widened enough to see inside. Not far, a few inches, but it was enough. Darkness, not surface shadow. Depth. Caleb crouched lower, angling his head to get a better look. Nothing moved. No sound came from within. Just that same steady push of air brushing against his face. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small cloth strip. Struck a match. Let the flame catch. Then held it near the opening. The fire flickered. Then leaned. Not outward. Up. Toward something higher inside. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Draft. He killed the flame, letting the smoke curl upward. It followed the same path. Not random. Directed. Ranger shifted beside him, letting out a low sound. Not a growl, not a whine. Something in between, and Caleb leaned back slightly. The numbers from earlier tried to come back. Wood, time, labor. They didn't matter here. This was something else. Something he hadn't calculated. He looked at the seam again, then at the rock wall stretching above and around it. Natural structure. No seams. No gaps for wind to cut through. No roof to build. The thought came in quiet. Not as an idea, as a correction. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his hands. Behind him, the wind howled stronger, pushing snow across the slope in long white streaks. He turned his head slightly, feeling it, then stepped closer to the rock again. The air at the opening didn't change. Still steady, still controlled, still usable. Ranger sat beside him, eyes fixed on the dark gap. Caleb followed his gaze. You've been trying to show me this all day. Oh, haven't you? Ranger didn't move. Didn't need to. Caleb gave a small nod, then reached down, gripping a larger stone at the base. He pulled. It resisted, then shifted, dropped free. The opening widened another inch. Darkness inside deepened. Caleb leaned in again, closer this time. The air flowed past his face, brushing his skin without biting. Different. Not warm, but not hostile. Behind him, the storm built. He could feel it now. Not just in the wind, in the pressure, in the way the air tightened across the ridge. Time was closing. The math had already told him that. But this wasn't in the math. He stepped back, looking at the opening, then at the tools scattered behind him, then at Ranger. The dog stood, tail steady, eyes locked on the seam, like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. As Caleb nodded once, decision made. "All right," he said quietly. "We try it your way." The wind howled louder behind them. Snow swept across the slope, filling in the tracks he'd made earlier. By morning, they'd be gone. But here, at the base of the rock, something had opened. And for the first time since he stepped onto that land, the outcome didn't feel fixed anymore. The storm came in low, not with thunder, not with warning, just a steady drop in light and a tightening in the air that made the trees hold still before the wind found them again. Caleb didn't go back to the lean-to. He stayed at the rock, worked until his hands stopped responding clean. The opening widened by inches, not feet. Each piece of limestone broke differently. Some crumbled, some held until the last second, then gave way all at once. And he adjusted with each shift, changing angles, using the axe as a pry instead of a blade. Ranger stayed close at first, then closer. When the gap grew enough to show more than shadow, the dog stepped forward without hesitation. Caleb caught his collar instinctively. "Hold." Ranger froze, not resisting, just waiting. Caleb leaned in again, studying the space beyond. Dark, but not sealed. He could feel it now more clearly, the movement of air brushing past his face, rising somewhere deeper inside. Not random currents, a pull, consistent. He let go of the collar. Ranger slipped through first, not rushing, controlled. Head low, shoulders tight, moving like he was clearing a narrow hallway. One step, pause, another, listening between movements. Caleb watched the entrance, counted 3 breaths, 4, no sound from inside. No shift in the air, no sign of collapse. He crouched lower and followed. The stone scraped along his shoulders as he squeezed through. The cold pressed in tighter for a moment, then broke. The difference hit immediately. Not warmth, not comfort, but stillness. The wind stopped, completely. Caleb stayed low, letting his eyes adjust. The darkness wasn't total. Faint light from the entrance carried just enough to outline the space. Ranger stood about 10 feet ahead, body angled, watching deeper into the chamber. Caleb didn't move past him, not yet. He reached into his pocket, pulled out another match, and struck it. The flame flared, small but steady. The chamber opened around it, wider than expected. Not a tunnel, a room. The ceiling rose just enough that he didn't have to crouch fully. The walls were raw limestone, uneven but solid, no signs of recent break or fracture. The floor was packed earth mixed with fine sediment, dry. That mattered. He raised the match slightly. The flame leaned upward again, drawn toward a narrow split near the ceiling at the far end. There it was, the exit point. Small, but enough. He let the match burn down to his fingers, watching the way the flame behaved, the way the air moved. Then he shook it out. Darkness settled again, but now it felt different. Defined. Understood. Caleb stood slowly, straightening his back. The space held. No creak, no shift, just silence. Ranger moved a step forward, then stopped, looking back once, checking. Caleb nodded slightly. "Clear." The word slipped out before he thought about it. It hung in the air for a second, then faded. Oh, he stepped fully into the chamber. The temperature didn't drop the way it should have. That was the second thing. Outside, the cold bit hard enough to numb skin in minutes. In here, it stayed level, cool, but stable. He exhaled, watching his breath. It still showed, but not as thick, not as fast. He walked the perimeter slowly, running his hand along the wall. Solid, no moisture, no loose sections. The back corner dipped slightly inward, forming a natural curve. Heat trap. The thought came without effort. He turned, looking back toward the entrance. The opening was small now, just a slit of pale light against the dark. Wind howled outside. He could hear it, but it didn't reach him. Not fully. Caleb crouched near the center of the chamber, setting his pack down. Ranger lay near the entrance, facing outward, ears still tuned to the storm. Caleb watched him for a second, then reached into his bag again. Cloth, match, small pieces of dry wood he'd kept separate. He built a test fire. Not large, controlled. He placed it too far back at first. Old instinct. Keep flame away from exposure. The fire caught quickly. Then the smoke changed. Instead of lifting clean, it spread low, crawling along the ceiling, then dipping back down toward him. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He didn't hesitate. He smothered it immediately, pressing dirt over the flame, cutting oxygen. The smoke lingered, thick for a second, then cleared. Lesson. He shifted position, moved closer to the entrance this time, rebuilt the fire. Smaller, more precise. This time, when the flame caught, the smoke lifted, pulled toward the fissure above. Clean. But Caleb watched it for a full minute. No change. No reversal. Just steady draw. Ranger's ears flicked once, but he didn't move. Caleb leaned back slightly. The shape of it settled in his mind. Not a shelter. A system. Airflow. Heat retention. Structure already built. No seams. No draft loss. He reached out, placing his hand against the stone near the small fire. The surface warmed slowly. Held it. Didn't give it back right away. Thermal mass. He sat there for a while, not moving, just watching the way the fire behaved, the way the air responded, the way the space held together. Outside, the storm picked up. He could hear snow striking the rock, the wind tearing through the trees, carrying sound in long, uneven waves. Inside, nothing shifted. Ranger lowered his head to the ground, still facing outward. Guarding, but Caleb leaned his back against the curved wall. For the first time since arriving, his shoulders dropped. Not fully, but enough. The tension didn't disappear. It adjusted, repositioned. He closed his eyes for a second. Not sleep, just a pause. The memory tried to push in again. Light, noise, movement. But it didn't land the same way. The chamber held the sound differently, muted it, contained it. He opened his eyes again. The fire burned steady. The smoke lifted clean. Ranger breathed slow and even near the entrance. Caleb looked around the space one more time, then down at his hands. Cracked, bleeding, working. He flexed his fingers once, then nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. The word carried differently in here. Softer, contained. Outside, the storm built toward something worse. But inside the rock, for the first time, he wasn't fighting the environment. He was working with it. And that changed everything. Morning didn't come the way it used to. There was no sunrise breaking over the ridge, no light flooding the ground in long, gold lines. Just a slow shift from black to gray at the narrow opening behind him. Caleb opened his eyes before the light changed, not because he was rested, because something in him never fully powered down. He lay still for a moment, back against the curved stone, feeling the space around him before he moved. The fire had burned down to a low bed of coals. Still alive. Still holding heat. He reached out, hovering his hand near the rock. Warm. Not hot. But enough. He sat up slowly. No stiffness from the wind. No ice forming on his clothes. No snow packed into seams. Oh, just cold air that didn't bite. Ranger lifted his head near the entrance, ears already forward. He hadn't slept much either. Caleb got to his feet and stepped toward the opening, pulling the hide of his jacket tighter as he moved through. The cold outside hit like a wall, sharp, immediate. The storm had settled overnight, leaving everything buried under a fresh, clean layer of white. The lean-to he'd built the day before sagged under the weight of it, half collapsed on one side. Useless. Caleb stood there for a second, taking it in, then turned back. Inside the chamber, nothing had shifted. That was the difference. He stepped back through the opening and crouched near the fire, feeding it small pieces of cedar. The flame caught quickly this time, rising clean. No smoke pushing back, no choke, just draw. He watched it for a long moment, then adjusted the position slightly, closer to the entrance. Better flow. He nodded once. Understanding wasn't complete, but it was forming. Ranger stepped in behind him, shaking snow from his coat in a low spray. One paw lingered a second longer on the ground before he set his weight fully. Caleb noticed. Didn't comment. The dog moved past him and lay down again, closer to the fire this time. Not guarding, resting. Caleb reached for his pack, pulling out what little food he had left. Jerky, hard, dry. He broke off a piece and handed it down without looking. Ranger took it gently. Caleb chewed his own in silence, eyes drifting to the ceiling, to the fissure, to the way the air moved without being seen. He finished the last bite, then wiped his hands on his pants. Work. Yet he moved to the back of the chamber, examining the floor more closely. The packed earth wasn't random. It held shape, held dryness. He dug at it with the edge of the axe. A few inches down, the texture changed. Finer, cooler, not frozen. He paused, then dug deeper. The soil gave way easier than expected. Not soft, but workable. It didn't resist like the surface ground outside. He sat back slightly. Storage. The thought landed clean. He looked at the wall again, at the curve, at the space. Not a shelter, a system. He stood, stepping back toward the fire. And that's when the smoke shifted. Subtle, but wrong. Instead of lifting clean, it hesitated, flattened, then dipped. Low. Caleb's body reacted before the thought finished forming. He moved fast, dropped low, hand reaching to smother the flame. But Ranger was already up, stepping back toward the entrance, clearing space. Caleb pressed dirt over the fire, cutting it off. The smoke thickened for a second. Then, it reversed, pulled upward again. Clean. Gone. Caleb stayed crouched, watching the air, waiting. His breathing had changed again. Short, controlled. The same way it did when something went wrong mid-operation. He looked up at the fissure, then back at the fire pit, then at the entrance. The pattern clicked. Not constant. The draw wasn't fixed. It shifted. Pressure. Outside. Inside. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a thin strip of cloth, tied it to a small piece of wood, held it near the entrance. Watched. The cloth moved, then stilled, then lifted again. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Timing. He moved the cloth closer to the fire, of stone, and watched again. The movement changed. Not random. Predictable. He stood slowly, stepping back. All right, he said under his breath. Not frustration. Adjustment. Ranger watched him, head slightly tilted. Caleb nodded once. We read it. The words felt right. Not guesswork. Not luck. Reading. He reset the fire, smaller this time, more controlled, watched the cloth, waited for the pull, then let it build. The smoke lifted clean again, held. Caleb leaned back slightly. That was the line. Not force, not size, timing. Ranger settled again, but his eyes stayed on Caleb now, tracking each movement, learning, or maybe just understanding. The hours passed differently after that. Caleb worked in cycles, test, adjust, observe, no wasted motion, no assumption. By midday, the chamber had changed, not physically, but in how it functioned. The fire held, the air moved, the stone warmed. He stacked wood along one wall, sorting it without thinking. Small, medium, dense. He didn't explain it. He didn't need to. Kindling for ignition. Heavier pieces for duration. He'd learned that somewhere else, somewhere hotter, more violent. But the principle stayed. Ranger moved once, shifting position again. This time he let out a low sound. Not loud, but enough. Caleb looked up. The dog's gaze fixed on the entrance. Caleb followed it. Snow outside had started again. Light, but steady. The wind carried a different tone now. Lower. He stepped toward the opening, crouching slightly to look out. The ridge blurred under the falling snow. Tracks from earlier were gone. Wiped clean. Isolation. Complete. He sat there for a second, and letting the cold brush his face, then leaned back inside. Ranger didn't move, still watching. Caleb reached down, placing a hand briefly on the dog's shoulder. "Yeah," he said quietly. The dog's ears flicked once, then settled. Caleb returned to the fire, feeding it another small piece. The smoke lifted, clean. The cloth near the entrance drifted upward, steady. He watched it for a long moment, then sat back against the curved wall again, not fully relaxed, but closer. Outside, the storm kept building. Inside, the system held. Caleb closed his eyes for a second. This time, the memory didn't hit the same way. No flash, no blast, just darkness, and a low, steady breath that didn't belong to him alone. When he opened his eyes again, the fire still burned. The air still moved. And for the first time since the numbers had failed him, he wasn't trying not to die. He was learning how to live here. The change didn't show all at once. It built in small corrections. Caleb moved through the chamber like he'd been there longer than a few days. Not comfortable, but familiar. He knew where the air shifted, knew how long the fire could hold before the draw weakened, knew which pieces of wood caught fast and which ones needed time. He didn't waste energy outside anymore. Short runs, direct paths, in and out. Ranger stayed ahead of him on every trip, mapping the ground again and again, checking for anything that didn't belong. The lean-to was gone by the second morning, collapsed under weight and wind. Caleb didn't rebuild it, didn't look back, and he hauled what he could salvage and moved it into the chamber instead. Wood lined one wall now, stacked shoulder-high, sorted without thought. A shallow pit had started near the back, dug just enough to test the ground. It held its shape, stayed dry. System. It was becoming real. The third day, Ranger caught the scent before Caleb saw anything. The dog stopped mid-step, body going still. Not alarmed. Alert. His head turned slightly toward the slope. Caleb followed the shift instantly. He lowered what he was carrying, hands free, posture adjusting without conscious thought. Scan left. Scan right. Tree line. Nothing. Then, movement. A figure breaking through the snow, coming up the ridge at an angle that wasn't direct. Not lost. Approaching. Caleb stepped slightly to the side of the rock face, still keeping the entrance behind him, but out of view. Ranger moved forward, positioning himself just ahead, body low, controlled, no bark, just presence. The man came into clearer view. Mid-40s, maybe. Heavy coat. Boots built for work, not travel. He didn't carry anything visible, but he didn't move like someone unfamiliar with the land. He slowed as he got closer, eyes scanning once, quick, sharp, then settling on Caleb. A smile formed, thin, not friendly. "Well," the man said, stopping a few yards out. "Didn't think anyone would stick it out up here this long?" Caleb didn't answer, didn't move. The man's gaze drifted past him, toward the rock face, toward the entrance, then back again. "I'm Derek Voss," he said. "Own the parcel down the ridge." Caleb gave a small nod. "Caleb." Derek's eyes flicked to Ranger. The dog didn't break his stare. "Good animal," Derek said. Ranger didn't react. Derek shifted his weight, glancing again at the ground, the stacked wood, the disturbed snow, taking inventory. Caleb watched him do it. Didn't interrupt. Didn't explain. "You planning on staying?" Derek asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes." Derek nodded slowly, then let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "That's a mistake." Caleb didn't respond. Derek stepped a little closer, boots crunching through the snow. "Land like this." He gestured loosely at the slope, the rock, the scattered trees. "Doesn't give much back. People try. They leave." His eyes moved again, calculating. "They leave cheap." There it was. Caleb's posture didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Derek caught it, smiled a little wider. "I could make you an offer," he said. "Save you the trouble." Caleb looked at him for a second, then past him, at the ridge, at the wind, then back again. "No." The word landed flat, final. Derek's smile didn't drop, but it shifted, edges tightening. "You sure about that?" Caleb didn't answer. Didn't need to. Ranger took one slow step forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Caleb now, body angled, weight balanced. Not aggressive, but not passive. Derek noticed. His eyes lingered on the dog for a second longer this time. Then he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "Your call." He turned slightly, like he was about to leave, then stopped. His boot came down hard on a small stack of split wood near the edge of the rock. The pieces scattered. No, not enough to destroy anything. Just enough to disrupt. To test. Ranger's body tensed. A low sound built in his chest. Controlled. Warning. Caleb didn't move. Didn't react. He just watched. Derek looked down at the wood, then back at Caleb, still smiling. "Ground shifts up here," he said. "Things fall apart easy." Caleb held his gaze. Didn't blink. Didn't rise to it. Didn't step forward. That seemed to matter more than anything else. Derek's smile faded just slightly. He looked at Ranger again, then back at Caleb, then nodded once. "Stay warm," he said. The words didn't sound like a wish. He turned and started back down the slope. Didn't rush. Didn't look back. Caleb stayed where he was until the man disappeared into the trees. Then he exhaled slowly. Ranger didn't relax right away. His eyes stayed locked on the path Derek had taken. Tracking. Waiting. Caleb stepped forward, picking up the scattered wood, stacking it again without speaking. His hands moved steady, but his attention stayed divided. Half on the work, half on the ridge. He didn't assume it was over. Didn't assume anything. That was the difference. Ranger returned to his side after a minute, brushing lightly against his leg before settling near the entrance again, still facing outward. Caleb glanced down at him, then back at the land. The storm was building again. He could feel it. Not just weather. Pressure. The kind that came from more than one direction. He stacked the last piece of wood, then stood. The chamber waited behind him. Stable. Controlled. Working. Outside, variables. Human ones now. Unpredictable. Human. And Caleb picked up the axe, resting it against his shoulder, then turned back toward the entrance. All right. he said quietly. Ranger's ears flicked. Caleb stepped inside. The air shifted immediately. Calmer. Contained. He crouched near the fire, adjusting it without thinking. The smoke lifted clean. The cloth near the entrance drifted upward. Steady. He watched it for a moment, then leaned back against the stone. The system held. But now, there was something else in the equation. Not wind, not cold. A man who had looked at the land the same way Caleb had, and come to a different conclusion. Caleb closed his eyes for a second. Not sleep, just recalibration. When he opened them again, Ranger was still watching the entrance, and the silence outside didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was waiting. Oh, the temperature dropped before the snow came. Caleb felt it in his hands first. Not the surface cold, the deeper shift, the kind that made metal sting faster and breath hang thicker in the air, the kind that didn't pass. He stood at the entrance of the chamber, watching the ridge fade into a dull gray. No birds, no movement. Even the wind had changed. It didn't gust anymore. It pushed. Steady. Relentless. Ranger stood beside him, ears forward, nose lifting slightly, as if trying to catch something buried under the storm. Caleb crouched, pressing his hand into the snow. Hard. Dry. No give. Yeah, he muttered. This was it. He turned back inside without another look. No hesitation. He moved fast now, but not rushed. There was a difference. He fed the fire low and steady, on building heat into the stone instead of chasing it into the air. Larger pieces of oak went in next, angled carefully so they would hold through the night. He checked the cloth at the entrance. It lifted. Held. Good. He adjusted the stone lip near the fire, tightening the position to keep the draw clean. Ranger paced once. Twice. Then stopped near the entrance again. Waiting. Caleb noticed. Didn't question it. He moved to the back of the chamber, checking the shallow pit. The ground stayed dry. Cool. Stable. He covered it lightly. Not finished, but usable. The light outside dropped fast. Too fast. By the time the first real snow hit the ground, the sky had already gone dark. Caleb pulled a piece of canvas across the entrance, leaving a gap at the top for airflow. The wind struck it immediately, snapping the fabric tight, then pressing against it in long, steady pulses. The sound filled the space. Low, constant. Ranger didn't react. He just sat. Watching. Caleb leaned back against the curved wall, eyes on the fire. The chamber held. The heat built slowly into the stone, spreading outward in a way that didn't fade when the flames dipped. Outside. The storm arrived all at once. Snow slammed into the ridge, driven sideways by wind that didn't break. The sound changed, from soft to violent. Ice struck the rock face in sharp bursts. Branches cracked somewhere in the dark. The sound carried and twisted by the wind until it felt closer than it was. Caleb's eyes flicked toward the entrance. His body tightened. For a second. Just a second. The sound wasn't wind. It was rotor blades, low, heavy, closing in, and his hand moved before he caught it, reaching, gripping nothing. The fire snapped. Reality snapped back with it. Snow, wind, Montana. He exhaled slowly, forced it. Ranger shifted closer, pressing against his leg again, grounding. Caleb didn't look at him, but he let it stay. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't move right inside the storm. The fire held. The air moved. The stone warmed. And still. The pressure outside kept building. Then Ranger moved. Fast. He stood, ears locked forward, body rigid. A sound cut through the storm. Not wind, not wood. Something else. Caleb was already up. He moved to the entrance, pulling the canvas back just enough to see through the snow. At first, nothing. just white. Then, movement. Low, struggling, a shape half buried, or crawling more than walking up the slope. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Distance, angle, speed, no threat pattern. He stepped out. The cold hit hard enough to steal the air from his lungs, but he didn't slow. Ranger was already ahead of him, cutting through the snow with short, efficient strides. The shape resolved into a boy, maybe 12, thin, no proper coat, his hands bare, skin pale against the snow. He collapsed before reaching the rock. Caleb closed the distance in seconds, dropped to one knee, checked airway. Breathing. Shallow. Fast. Skin cold. Too cold. Ranger hovered close, whining low now, circling once before stopping. Caleb lifted the boy without thinking, turning back toward the chamber. The wind pushed against him, trying to take his balance. He adjusted. Short steps. Keep center. Don't fight the slope. Yet he pushed through the entrance, dragging the canvas back into place behind him. Inside, the difference hit immediately. Stillness. Heat. Containment. He laid the boy near the fire, already moving through the steps. Boots off. Clothes loosened. Not fast. Not aggressive. Gradual. He grabbed a cloth, dipped it in warmed water, pressed it gently against the boy's hands. Ranger lay close, body angled toward the child, adding heat. The boy's lips moved. No words, just sound. Caleb leaned closer. "Stay with me," he said quietly. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. The fire held. The smoke lifted clean. The cloth near the entrance drifted upward. No change. Good. Caleb shifted a heated stone closer, wrapping it before placing it near the boy's side. Not direct. Controlled. The boy's breathing hitched once, then steadied slightly. Outside. The storm kept erasing everything. Tracks, shapes, distance. Inside. The chamber held. Minutes passed, then longer. The boy's color shifted slowly, not fully back, but enough. Ranger didn't move, didn't look away. Caleb sat back slightly, watching the fire, watching the air, watching the boy, and then another sound. Closer this time. Heavy. Deliberate. A shape appeared at the entrance. Caleb's hand moved again, not reaching for a weapon, just ready. The canvas shifted. A figure stood there, half hidden by snow and shadow. For a second, Caleb didn't recognize him. Then, Derek. His hands were wrapped in cloth, dark, wet. He didn't step in right away, just stood there breathing hard, eyes unfocused. "The stove," he said, voice breaking slightly. Wouldn't hold. Heat just gone." He didn't look at Caleb, didn't look at Ranger, just stared at the fire, at the chamber, at the thing he'd dismissed. Caleb didn't answer, didn't move. The silence stretched. The storm pressed against the canvas behind Derek, rattling it hard. Then Caleb stepped aside. Just enough. Derek hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The air changed around him instantly. He felt it. His shoulders dropped without him meaning to. He sank down near the wall, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the fire like he didn't trust it to stay. Ranger stood, watched him, didn't approach, didn't back off, just held position. Caleb returned to the boy, adjusting the cloth again, checking the breathing. Still shallow, but stable. The fire burned low and steady. The smoke lifted clean. Outside, the storm erased everything that had been. Inside, 4 bodies breathed. 1 system held, and the place that had been called a grave was the only thing keeping them alive. The fire didn't rise. It held. That was the difference. Caleb kept it low, feeding it in small, measured pieces, watching the draw instead of the flame. The cloth near the entrance lifted steady, the smoke pulling clean toward the fissure above. No waste. No panic. Just control. The boy's breathing steadied in uneven waves. Still shallow. Still fragile. But no longer fading. Caleb adjusted the wrapped stones again, shifting them closer to the boy's core. Not his hands. Not his feet. Center first. Always center. Ranger stayed beside them, body pressed close, adding heat without being told. His ears still flicked toward the entrance, tracking every shift in sound outside. Derek sat against the wall, not speaking, not moving much. His hands were wrapped in strips of cloth that had soaked through in places, darkened by whatever he'd tried to fix before he ran. He stared at the fire like it might disappear if he looked away. Caleb didn't look at him. Not yet. The storm pressed harder against the chamber now. The canvas snapped and strained at the entrance, the wind driving it inward in long, heavy pulses. Snow packed into every exposed gap outside, sealing the ridge under a shifting, white weight. Inside. The air stayed still, contained. Caleb leaned back slightly, watching the cloth again. Still lifting. Still good. He let out a slow breath. Then, the draft faltered. Not stopped, but changed. The cloth dipped. Just slightly. Well, Caleb saw it immediately. He moved without hesitation, shifted the fire, pulled one piece back, reduced the flame. The smoke thickened for a second, then lifted again. Clean. The system corrected. Derek noticed. His eyes flicked from the fire to the cloth, then to Caleb. "You're controlling it," he said quietly. Not a question. Caleb didn't answer, didn't explain. He just kept watching the air. Derek swallowed, shifting slightly against the wall. "My stove. The pipe came loose," he said after a moment. Draft died. Smoke filled the place in minutes. He looked down at his hands. They burned before I even felt it. Caleb glanced at him once, then back to the fire. Derek let out a short breath. "I couldn't hold the heat," he said. "Didn't matter how much wood I threw in." The words hung there, heavy, and Ranger's eyes moved to him, still, watchful. Caleb adjusted the cloth again, confirming the pull, then sat back slightly. "You built to fight it," he said finally. Derek looked up. Caleb didn't meet his eyes. "You tried to beat the cold," Caleb continued, voice low. "Out here, it doesn't lose." Derek didn't respond, didn't argue. He just sat there, breathing slower now, the tension in his shoulders easing without him noticing. The boy shifted slightly, a small movement. But enough. Caleb leaned in immediately, eyes open, faint. But there. The boy's lips moved again. "Cold," he whispered. Caleb shook his head once. Not anymore. He adjusted the blankets again, pulling them tighter, sealing the heat in. Ranger shifted closer, pressing his body along the boy's side. The fire held steady, on outside. The storm hit its peak. The wind didn't howl anymore. It screamed, a constant, unbroken force that flattened everything it touched. Trees bent under the pressure. Ice cracked somewhere in the distance, the sound sharp and distant and immediate all at once. Caleb's eyes flicked to the entrance again. For a second. The sound twisted, changed. It wasn't wind. It was incoming. Rounds hitting dirt. Metal tearing. A voice shouting over comms. He blinked hard. The chamber snapped back into place. Stone. Fire. Breath. Ranger shifted, pressing closer again. Grounding. Caleb exhaled slowly. Not now. He leaned back, forcing his shoulders to drop. The boy's breathing steadied further. Color returned slowly to his face. Not fully, but enough. Derek watched it happen. Didn't speak. Didn't interrupt. Oh, just watched. The hours passed without shape. The fire burned low. The air moved. The stone held. At some point, the wind began to change. Not weaker, just different. The edge softened. The pressure shifted. Caleb noticed it before he heard it. The cloth lifted higher, cleaner, stronger draw. He adjusted the fire slightly, feeding it just enough to maintain the balance. Then he leaned back against the curved wall. Ranger stayed awake, still watching, still listening. Derek's head dropped forward at some point, exhaustion pulling him under despite everything. His breathing slowed, uneven at first, then deeper. The boy slept. Caleb didn't. Not fully. He sat there, eyes open, tracking every change in the air, every shift in sound, every movement in the space around him. But something had changed. The tension didn't spike the same way. The noise didn't break him out of the moment. It stayed outside, where it belonged. For the first time, the storm didn't follow him inside. Morning came slowly. The wind dropped first, then the snow, then the silence. Real silence. Not empty, not waiting, just still. Caleb stood, moving toward the entrance. He pulled the canvas back. Light hit him hard after the dark. The ridge was gone, buried. Snow drifted high enough to swallow the ground in soft, uneven waves. Trees bent low, their branches locked in ice. The world had been reshaped overnight, erased. He stood there for a second, scanning. No movement, no tracks, nothing left of what had been. Behind him, Ranger stepped up beside him. Caleb glanced down. The dog's ears were relaxed now, for the first time. Now Caleb nodded once, then stepped back inside. Derek was awake, watching him. The look in his eyes wasn't the same. No edge, no calculation, just something quieter. He glanced around the chamber, at the fire, at the walls, at the space that had held when everything else had failed. Then back at Caleb. "You built this," he said. Caleb shook his head slightly. "No." He looked down at Ranger. The dog stood steady beside him, calm now. "He did." Derek followed his gaze, looked at the dog, then back at the chamber, then down at his hands. He didn't argue, didn't smile. He just nodded once. And in that moment, the man who had come to take the land sat inside it, alive, because of something he hadn't believed in, because of something he couldn't take. And outside, the storm had taken everything else. The first thing that came back wasn't sound. It was light. A pale, frozen wash spreading across the ridge, catching on ice and snow, until the whole world looked like it had been carved out of glass. Caleb stood at the entrance, letting his eyes adjust. No movement. No smoke from other homes. No tracks. Just a white silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. Ranger stepped past him, paws sinking deep into the drift. He moved a few yards out, nose low, tracing lines beneath the surface. Searching, checking. Caleb watched him go, then turned back inside. The chamber still held. The fire burned low but steady, the coals carrying heat into the stone. The air remained stable, the cloth near the entrance lifting gently, the draft unchanged. Derek sat where he had been, shoulders no longer tight. His hands wrapped in fresh cloth Caleb had cut from his own pack. He looked different now. Not smaller, just quieter. The boy stirred again. This time his eyes opened fully, confused, slow. He blinked at the stone ceiling, then at the fire, then at Caleb. "Where?" he started. "Safe," Caleb said. The word landed simple. The boy nodded slightly, his body too tired to question it further. Ranger returned then, brushing snow from his coat as he stepped back inside. One of his front paws lingered again, just a fraction longer before he placed it fully. Caleb noticed. He crouched, running his hand briefly along the dog's leg. Ranger didn't pull away, but the muscle there tightened slightly under his touch. Caleb didn't say anything, just let his hand rest there a second longer. Then he stood. By midday, the first sign of life returned. Not from the land, from people. A shape moved at the far edge of the ridge, then another, slow, careful. Caleb saw them before they reached the slope. 2 figures, then 3, moving together, not hunting, not searching. Heading here. Ranger's ears went up immediately. He stepped forward, positioning himself at the entrance again. Caleb didn't stop him. Didn't step outside yet. He waited, watched. The figures came closer, pushing through snow that reached nearly to their knees. One of them stumbled, caught himself, then kept moving. When they reached the base of the rock, they stopped. A woman, mid-30s maybe, face drawn tight from cold and exhaustion. Behind her, an older man, bent slightly but still moving under his own weight. And another, hard to see clearly through the light, but standing steady. They looked up at the rock, at the narrow opening, at the faint trace of smoke rising from it. The woman stepped forward first. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice carried, thin but clear. Caleb stepped into view. She froze for a second. Then relief hit her all at once. "You're alive," she said. Not a question. Caleb nodded once. She looked past him, into the chamber, at the fire, at the boy, at Derek, her breath caught. "My son," she said, stepping forward without waiting. Caleb moved aside just enough to let her through. She dropped beside the boy immediately, hands moving over him, checking, confirming. "You're okay," she whispered, voice breaking. The boy nodded weakly. "Found him," he said, glancing toward Caleb. She looked up, met Caleb's eyes. Didn't say thank you. Didn't need to. The older man stepped in next. Earl. He stopped just inside the entrance, taking in the chamber slowly. The walls, the fire, the air, the way the space held together. He didn't speak. Not right away. Derek shifted slightly against the wall, eyes dropping. Earl noticed him, then looked back at Caleb, then at the chamber again. He stepped forward, crouching near the fire, held his hand out, felt the heat. Not from the flame, from the stone. His brow furrowed, then smoothed. Understanding didn't come all at once, but it came. "You changed the ground," he said quietly. Caleb shook his head. "No." He glanced at Ranger again. The dog stood still at the entrance, watching everything, but not tense. Not anymore. Earl followed the look, then nodded slowly. "Right," he said. The woman stayed beside her son, pulling him closer, wrapping him tighter in the blankets. The third man stepped in last, saying nothing, just standing near the wall, eyes moving across every detail. Word spread fast after that. Not through talking, through survival. By afternoon, more shapes appeared on the ridge. 1, then 2, then more. People who had held through the night in places that didn't hold back. People who had burned through wood and still couldn't keep the cold out. People who had watched the storm take things they couldn't replace. They came slow, careful, not asking, just looking. Caleb didn't explain, didn't lecture. He showed. A piece of cloth at the entrance, the way it moved, the position of the fire, the stone, the curve of the wall. Small things, quiet things, things that mattered. Ranger moved among them without tension, but never far from Caleb. Always watching, always checking. The chamber filled, but not crowded. Ordered, balanced. The air still moved, the fire still held. By evening, the ridge didn't feel empty anymore. Not waiting, not threatening. Just changed. Caleb stepped back, leaning against the curved wall again. The sound inside had shifted. Breathing, low voices, movement. But none of it pressed against him. None of it broke the space the way noise used to. He closed his eyes for a second. And this time, nothing followed. No flash. No sound. Just stillness. Real stillness. When he opened them again, Ranger was lying near the entrance, one eye half open, watching the outside without tension. Caleb looked at him for a long moment, and then nodded slightly. The storm had taken everything. But this had held, and for the first time since the door had closed behind him, the silence didn't sound like something he had to survive. It sounded like something he could stay in. Winter didn't end all at once. It loosened its grip, slow, measured. The snow softened first, the surface losing its edge, giving slightly under each step instead of cracking hard. The wind stopped cutting and started moving again, carrying sound farther across the ridge. Life returned in pieces. Tracks appeared. Smoke rose from places that had none before. And the chamber held. Not as a last resort, as a choice. Caleb didn't rush to change it. He didn't build a cabin right away. Didn't leave the stone behind. He expanded it. Carefully. One adjustment at a time. On a second layer at the entrance. 2 hanging barriers instead of 1. Cold hit the first, lost its force, then met the second already weakened. A better fire base, flat stone set just right, angled to catch the draw without pushing smoke back. A deeper pit at the rear, lined and layered, holding food below the frost, where it stayed steady instead of freezing solid. He didn't explain it. He worked it. People came back. Not out of curiosity. Out of memory. They had seen what held. That was enough. Earl came often. Not to question anymore. To learn. He stood in the chamber longer each time, watching the cloth, the fire, the way Caleb moved without wasting anything. "You don't fight it," Earl said once. Caleb shook his head. "No." Earl nodded slowly. "Then it doesn't fight you." That was as close as he came to admitting he'd been wrong. The woman returned too, with her son, alive, walking on his own. He didn't say much, just stayed close to the entrance, watching Ranger more than anything else. The dog didn't approach, didn't need to. The boy understood anyway. Derek came back last, not right away, not until the snow had started to pull back from the lower ground. He walked up the ridge without his usual weight behind each step. No edge, no claim, just presence. He stopped at the entrance, didn't step in, just looked. At the stone, at the fire, at Caleb. Ranger stood beside Caleb, body relaxed but aware. Derek nodded once, then turned, left. He didn't come back again, but he didn't try to take anything either. That was enough. And the spring came in quiet ways. Water moved again under the rock. The creek that had vanished returned, threading its way through the lower ground in thin, steady lines. Caleb adjusted for it. Cut drainage, redirected flow, didn't let the system break. He worked the land the way he worked the chamber, not forcing, reading. Ranger moved differently now, still alert, still tracking, but slower. One of his front legs didn't carry weight the same way it used to. Caleb had seen it the morning after the storm. A slight hesitation, a shift in balance. He hadn't said anything, just adjusted. Shorter runs, less distance. The dog didn't complain, didn't fall behind. He stayed where he always had, at Caleb's side. Years passed the same way winter had ended, not in a rush, in layers. The chamber grew, not larger in size, but deeper in purpose. Wood met stone at the edges now, a hybrid structure, the outside world connected to the inside system, not replacing it, but extending it. Others built their own. Not exact copies, but close. Close enough to hold. The ridge changed, not in how it looked, in how it worked. Fewer people left. More stayed. The storm that had erased everything became something else. A line, before and after. Caleb didn't talk about it, didn't tell the story. He didn't need to. It was written in the way people built now, in the way they watched the air instead of the fire, in the way they listened to the land instead of trying to bend it. Ranger slowed more with each passing season. His steps shortened. His eyes clouded slightly at the edges. But he never stopped watching, never stopped tracking. One evening, years later, Caleb sat at the entrance as the sun dropped behind the ridge. The light stretched across the stone, catching the edges of the chamber, warming it in a way fire never could. Ranger lay beside him, one leg stretched out slightly, the other tucked under, breathing slow, steady. Caleb reached down, resting his hand on the dog's side, felt the rise, the fall, the same rhythm that had followed him through everything. He looked out at the land, not empty, not waiting, alive, working. Then back at the stone, at the place that had held when nothing else did. People had said he survived the storm, that he built something no one else could, that he figured it out. Caleb shook his head slightly, almost to himself. His hand moved along Ranger's side, fingers resting in the fur that had gone rough with time. "No," he said quietly. The word carried softly into the stone, not an argument, a correction. He looked down at the dog, at the one who had stopped at the rock when nothing else made sense, at the one who had stayed when everything else had left. "The truth is," he paused, not because he didn't know, because he did. "You found it first." Ranger didn't move, didn't need to. His breathing stayed steady. The stone held the heat. The air moved clean, and the place that had once been called a grave had become something else entirely. Not a shelter, not a refuge, a way to live. And Caleb, for the first time, wasn't just surviving inside it. He belonged there. And maybe that's the part that stays with you. Not the storm, not the cold, not even the cave, but the moment someone stops fighting and finally finds where they're meant to stand. So let me ask you something. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, drop a simple 1 in the comments. Just a 1. No explanation needed. It lets me know you were here, and you felt it too. And if this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. Because there are more stories like this coming, real, raw, and worth your time. I'll see you in the next one.